Prime Minister Narendra Modi has concluded his historic three-day state visit to the United States. It has been described by many as a path-breaking visit, one that has cemented India-US ties and taken them to the next level. During his final engagement in the US, when Prime Minister Modi addressed the Indian diaspora, he summed up his visit by saying, "In these 3 days, in India and US relations, a new and glorious yatra or journey has begun. The new journey is about our cooperation for Make in India and Make for the World. Together, the US and India are not just forming policies, we are shaping lives, dreams and destinies. Be it on convergence on global issues or tech transfer, both countries are taking strong steps for a better future." Earlier, at a meeting with top business honchos from the two countries, President Biden gifted a special T-shirt to Prime Minister Modi. This T-shirt had Prime Minister Modi's rather quotable quote on AI printed on it. "The future is AI, America and India." That is the new definition for AI that Prime Minister Modi gave during his address to a joint session of the US Congress. President Biden too said on multiple occasions that India-US ties will define the 21st century. This visit has seen many epoch-making deals and big-ticket announcements. Let's take a look at some of the key takeaways. Most agree that the one area where there have been the biggest breakthroughs is that of defense ties and technology cooperation. American giant General Electric and India's Hindustan Aeronautics Limited signed a memorandum of understanding to jointly produce fighter jet engines for the Indian Air Force with significant transfer of technology. It's been termed a game changer and a trailblazing initiative. Remember, this is the first time that the US is sharing such sensitive technology with a non-ally. Technology that only 4 countries in the world currently possess. Another major deal has been on India procuring cutting-edge Predator drones from an American company. These drones will substantially enhance the Indian Armed Forces surveillance and strike capabilities. Leading American technology firm Micron will set up a mega semiconductor facility in India, the first of its kind in the country. In the area of quantum advanced computing and artificial intelligence, the two sides have established a joint Indo-US quantum coordination mechanism to facilitate joint research between the public and private sectors. Google CEO Sundar Pichai announced that the tech giant will be opening its global fintech operations center in Gujarat and invest $10 billion in India's digitization fund. India has joined the Artemis Accords, a joint exploration of Moon and Mars. H-1B visa rules have been changed, and that's likely to make life easier for many Indians working in the US. The two sides will open new consulates in both countries to enhance people-to-people ties and travel. India and the US have also agreed to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization, and India has joined the Mineral Security Partnership that aims to create critical energy supply chains. Indian solar panel maker Vikram Solar Limited will invest $1.5 billion in the US solar energy supply chain. On the show today, we're asking, is the future indeed AI, America and India?
ये सारे समझौते, ये एग्रीमेंट्स सिर्फ कुछ नीतियों को आगे बढ़ाना मात्र नहीं है। ये भारत अमेरिका के करोड़ों लोगों के भाग्य को नई ऊंचाई देने का काम हुआ है। टुगेदर we are not just forming policies and agreements. We are shaping lives, dreams, and destinies.
It was an honor to meet Prime Minister Modi during a historic visit to the US. The excitement here, in terms of seeing the progress India has made, particularly around the vision of digital India and the economic opportunity. And I met the Prime Minister in December, and we continued our conversation. And we shared, Google is investing $10 billion in the India Digitization Fund, and we are continuing to invest through that, including in companies working on AI. As part of that, we have a 100-language initiative. We are bringing BARD to more Indian languages very soon. And we are also excited today that we are announcing the opening of our Global FinTech Operations Center in Gift City, Gujarat. And it'll cement India's FinTech leadership thanks to UPI and Aadhaar. And we're going to build on that foundation and take it globally. So we are very excited at the progress, and with the advent of AI, I think the opportunity for India to make more progress is definitely exciting, and we're going to support the Prime Minister's vision there. I mean, his vision for digital India was ahead of its time. I now see it as a blueprint other countries are looking to do. And the follow through on the scaling up of India's digital stack is a model other countries are thinking about. And I think it's something which will be important in G20 as well, which is obviously happening in India. So it's a real exciting to see the progress, his commitment towards the economic growth for India, and we are glad to be partners in that journey.
Well, this was a historical moment and a pivotal moment. When you look at the last 3 days, Prime Minister has met from New York to CEOs in Washington, D.C., the White House State Dinner, the White House 21-gun salute, and now today with his leadership. You are seeing a much, much stronger interest in India, not only just purely from an FDI perspective, but from an innovation perspective. And he said that the partnership between US and India is going to benefit the world. So to me, this was a great event, great trip of the Prime Minister. Well, I think you have to understand the trade is growing between India and the US in every aspect, regardless of a trade deal or not. You have to also understand that geopolitically, both countries are aligned vis-a-vis China. And a lot of US companies are saying, how do we de-risk our supply chain? And they're looking at India as a potential source for that de-risking. And also you have to understand that India, as India's economy grows, it is now $3.75 trillion, growing at 7%. The purchasing power parity of the citizen goes up, and they're going to buy more and more American goods and services. So I think it's a win-win value proposition for both countries.
An investment bank based out of DC, helping with sustainable infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and healthcare infrastructure for US and Indian customers. I think he instills a lot of confidence. He inspired us to do more, and he wants us to be part of the revolution that India is on to become the third largest economy in the next 5 years.
Well, Prime Minister Modi's speech, as always, is very articulate. He covered all the progress that India has made, and the partnership in particular between United States and India, which has been flourishing. It's amazing what has happened just in the last 3 days in terms of just elevating it to a completely new level across defense, across technology, and it's heartening to see just the collaboration between the two countries. Well, I mean, I think in one of the sentences, Prime Minister Modi talked about conviction, compassion and commitment. I thought those 3 C's really wrapped it up really well. The trust and commitment required to execute on some of the actions. A lot of people talk about things, but it's really about executing on those actions. So I think with the track record and the commitments from both Joe Biden and Narendra Modi, I think great things to come.
Chief Operating Officer of T-Hub. T-Hub is the largest innovation campus in the world, and we support startups across 25 sectors, and we incubate approximately around, we have a capacity of incubating around 1,000 startups in our physical capacity, in our physical facility at Hyderabad, and we also support another 2,500 startups across around 25 odd sectors. First, his speech is always inspirational, one. Second is, I think there was a lot of emphasis laid on the Indo-US relationships. I think the intent, not only during his speech, but also we had pretty in-depth interactions with both the DoD, between the DoD and MOD. I'm part of the delegation which the MOD has brought to US. Right from the polity level, to the second line, which actually plans out and rolls out, the intent is pretty clear to work towards a common goal. Those goals were sort of getting realized, and also there was a lot of framework, work on the framework has started on how these goals can materialize into objectives, activities, and outcomes in the near future.
All right, let's go across to our first guest. We're joined by former diplomat, Ambassador Anil Trigunyad. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts on how this historic 3-day state visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States panned out. We heard President Biden saying these are two great nations, friends in power, and India-US ties will define the 21st century. Prime Minister Modi very interestingly said the future is AI, America and India. Is that something you would agree with? How do you look back at this visit?
Well, I think this was simply exceptional, Neha. I mean, you have not seen any other world leader having that kind of an euphoria in United States. And I have handled various visits of the previous prime ministers in the US, and I have seen that there was interest, but not to this extent. And not only because of diaspora, but because the Americans have begun to realize that India is growing. India will become a world leader, which the Americans are realizing it very well, and it's the largest democracy. So I would say that this is something which is remarkable. And the way Prime Minister Modi has projected India in the US, the achievements, the potential, he has actually was able to bring about America and India on the same pedestal as the two economies that can work together, the talent pool that India has, the kind of trust that has been developed, and the technology transfer will enable that. And that's why what you say is AI, and he has given a new definition to it, America and India. I mean, this is precisely the India can be a great incubator, whereas America already is a technology leader, and India needs high technologies, critical technologies, minerals, and various partnerships in order to reach the level that India is bound to reach. I mean, not wishes to reach, is bound to reach. And that's why the policies that we have seen, this is I would say, a tectonic shift, frankly, in the relationship and to the next level, from where it can only go upwards. So I find that this is an important thing. And in between our countries, there are several commonalities, which I call as some days as like democracy. I mean, you have seen that the way Prime Minister spoke at the Parliament was, at the Congress, was as if he was speaking at the Indian Parliament. I mean, he was in total control and conveying everything so convincingly. And that's the reason you saw so much of applause. And that he, of course, everybody knows that he's tremendously articulate, but articulate with facts, which is what brings about. So he was able to convey the message to detractors, what they are doing. And then, of course, the second D, I feel, is the deepening economic and technical cooperation, which is very, very important. And then, of course, defense and security are the main pillar of the relationship. And, of course, our diaspora, which plays a very important role in the country and is in the leadership position today, and both in the industry, multinationals, as well as in the political domain. And they are driven. And today they look at India, they look themselves also. They don't hesitate, like we have seen Kamala Harris also recalling her roots, Indian roots. So when I was there in 90s, and I remember most of our Indian friends used to call themselves, I'm from Tamil Nadu, I'm from XYZ. But today, every Indian, young, old, relates to India, and that is the achievement I think is remarkable. Then, of course, we have these disruptions that are taking place in the global order because of hegemonistic attitudes of certain countries, which have been called out, who have been asked to adhere to the global international rules, and especially in the Indo-Pacific. So that is also very much there. And the most important thing I found is that the Americans, and especially the establishment, has very clearly understood that India believes in alignments, mutually beneficial alignments, and not alliance mindset. And the fact that the United States is willing to go along those lines is something I find a remarkable achievement for India. And Prime Minister Modi has very clearly conveyed that India is a strategic choice, not only because of their strategic compulsion.
Certainly, it would seem like the relationship has been reset and taken to the next level. Let's focus on some specifics. This visit was high both on optics and on substance. Some very big deals have been struck. Some of them are being described as path-breaking. Of course, apart from the fact that Micron is going to set up India's first semiconductor facility, and we're going to buy cutting-edge Predator drones from the United States that will significantly enhance the Indian armed forces surveillance and strike capabilities. The one big ticket item has really been the technology transfer deal and the deal between GE and Hindustan Aeronautics to jointly manufacture fighter jet engines here in India. Now, Ambassador, according to you, how path-breaking is this deal given the fact that never before has the US been willing to share technology with India? And this is actually the first time that the US is sharing sensitive technology of this nature with a non-ally. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this technology that we're talking about is considered the holy grail of military aviation, currently in the possession of all of 4 countries.
Absolutely, Neha. I mean, India will become a part of that club because of this, and that clearly explains the 3 T's that we are talking about. The one of them is, of course, the trust. So today, the United States has developed the trust in India that it can share those technologies which have not been shared with even their very close and alliance partners. So India is a non-ally. No doubt, but it is a great friend, and that's what we look at it. And we are looking at it when AI, you mentioned America and India instead of artificial intelligence. So the relationship is no longer artificial in that sense. So it's an extremely important achievement for India. But I must say that in 2008, when we signed the civil nuclear deal, that was probably also a very path-breaking shift in the US policy at that time, and also enabled India to become a kind of a nuclear power that it is today. So that is very important. And I know that for a fact from my friends in the different areas that this is something that India looks to then excel in the aviation sector a great deal, and that will provide the requisite edge to India. You know, even China does not manufacture its own engines. So till now, we've been buying, we have used the GE. There is a great interest in Tejas aircrafts that India is making, in which we are using the GE engine. So I think once we start manufacturing ourselves with the greater R&D and collaboration, you can always go up and you can always improve upon it, including going into the civilian aircraft construction, which we have been thinking of for a very long time. So I think that this is one of the very major. Apart from that, what Prime Minister Modi also talked about was a very interesting thing, because simple transfer of technology does not work. So you need the skill mapping, you need the talent pipeline, which only India can provide by being such a young country, the largest youth dividend that India has, and that too in technology, we are really quite good. Our people are very, greatly this thing. Secondly, one more thing you should remember always is the 80s, you were very young. But the fact is that India's economy, the knowledge economy progress has been greatly attributed to the diaspora as well as the US enterprise. You know, that's how India became a knowledge power, an IT power in the world. So these are all relationships that have carried forward now. Today, Prime Minister Modi, everybody says that how does he talk about quantum computing is as if he has been trained in technology and science and all that. So, but it's the inquisitiveness. And so I find that AI, quantum computing, and other technologies, nanotechnologies, and all which are coming up now, a great deal. And those are going to decide the future as we move into the AI-driven Industrial Revolution 4.0. And India's, I would say, the India campaign, what India has launched is emerging rather successful and attractive for the companies. And that's what we have seen in his interactions with the multiple multinational corporation chiefs. Everybody came out very optimistic about India, and we have to see how it moves forward. Apart from the semantics or the symbolism, there is a tremendous substance in the outcome document. And of course, if you see the joint statement that was issued, that statement was full of doables. What are deliverables? That are how it is going to play out eventually and who's going to fund, where it is coming from. So it's to the last detail. And that's why I think that we are looking at a much deeper, much closer partnership, and which we call as a consequential partnership for the global good, actually.
Well, that's exactly what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said, and there is no doubt that there have been multiple deliverables. In fact, many have said that, there isn't a single area that hasn't been touched upon by the two sides during this visit. What also struck me as very interesting, apart from all the deals that we've discussed, the investments that have been announced. It seems to be happening on a reciprocal basis. It is not a one-way street. So while on the one hand you have Micron, the American major that is going to, chip maker that's going to set up India's first semiconductor facility in Gujarat. And of course, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, announcing that his tech giant is going to set up its global fintech operations center in Gujarat, and that will, in fact, involve an investment of $10 billion in India's digitization fund. But apart from that, what's interesting is that, Indian solar maker Vikram Solar Limited is going to invest $1.5 billion in the US solar energy supply chain. So in a sense, you don't just have American companies investing in India, you also have Indian companies investing in a big way in the United States. In fact, according to some data, Indian companies actually have a presence across all 50 American states today.
You are absolutely right. I mean, Indian companies have been investing for quite some time now, and they are even taking over many of the companies in the United States. And we are one of the major investors, in fact, in many countries in the world. And that is why I always say trade and investment are a two-way street, and they are mutually and complementary. And so, therefore, this is very important, and the Americans understood it. Prime Minister Modi, in his speech, when he said that when India buys one Boeing plane, it provides 1 million people employment, Americans employment across 44 states. I mean, that is not just, spending the statistics, but it is frankly, that's the truth. And that's what the Americans are looking for. That's why I say that we'll have to find a synergy, essentially, between Make in India and America First, so that we are able to reach. And I think that is to a great extent has been achieved. And what you mentioned about the investments that Indian companies are planning or have committed to do in the United States is an absolutely an imperative for future growth of the two nations.
Right. And, talking about the deliverables, there have been many. We are talking about the investments that are going to be made by Indian and American companies in each other's countries. We've talked about some big ticket defense deals that are going to be game changing for India's armed forces and for the India-US relationship. Apart from that, H-1B visa rules have been changed, and that's expected to make life a lot easier for many Indians working in the US. India has joined the Artemis Accords, a joint exploration of Moon and Mars. The two sides have agreed to open new consulates in the two countries. India and the US have also agreed to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization, and India has joined the Mineral Security Partnership that aims to create critical energy supply chains. So this really does, in a sense, extend to every possible area of bilateral cooperation.
You are absolutely right once again. I mean, these are the things which are very important. Critical minerals you mentioned about. Now we have seen that how the supply chains have been disrupted during the pandemic and post that the Russian-American and Russian war, and the Chinese hegemony. So we are looking at these disruptions. So India is trying to become a major partner as far as the global and value supply chains are concerned. We have shown it in the vaccines, in the pharma and several other areas to the world that India can deliver, and that has been proven now. And so the United States is also looking at India becoming a greater partner in this. So whether it is microchips, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is in other manufacturing of the high-end goods. I think that this cooperation will continue. And then, of course, the visas are very important. And for that H1 visa and the overall the visa regime, I would say, inshallah. Let's hope that it works out. They're opening 2 more consulates. That's very good, excellent. And we are also going to open 2 more consulates, which are needed there to cover span out into a bigger area and identify opportunities that will be useful for both the countries. So I think that once the trust begins, once you impose a lot of faith in another country's capabilities and intent, then I think things move easily. And of course, next year we have elections both in India and the United States, and let's see how it plays out eventually. Good thing is that in relationship in India is currently endorsed and has a bipartisan support across the spectrum in the United States. So they do understand, because because of Chinese threat, because of the geopolitical reverberations that are taking place. But we'll have to see how it eventually plays out. But India-US relationship is going to be in the next orbit and on the upswing.
On the upswing, no two ways about that. Let's talk about certain other specific issues that came up during this visit. Let's talk about China. Now, Prime Minister Modi, in his address to the US Congress, said, and I'm quoting him, "The dark clouds of coercion and confrontation are casting their shadow in the Indo-Pacific. The stability of the region has become one of the central concerns of the India-US partnership. We share a vision of a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific that is free from domination." It is very clear that China is a shared concern for the two countries, and this would have surely been discussed between the two sides, including in the one-on-one dialogue, one believes, between Prime Minister Modi and President Joe Biden. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that there are these grave challenges today which have to be discussed, and whenever the leaders meet, there are issues, bilateral issues, there are regional issues, there are global issues and challenges, and how we can synergize our cooperation to confront them and to address those challenges. These are very common things, and I think in one-on-one meetings they would have done, which prolonged beyond its prescribed time frame. As everybody knows that the China or dragon is in the room, as the saying goes, the Chinese hegemony is also pushing a lot of countries and a lot of relationships into securitizing themselves to protect themselves. So it's very important. But India's approach has been to convey to the Chinese that what is good for them. When India says it should be inclusive, prosperous, and rule-based international order in the Indo-Pacific, it is very important. It is whatever happens in the Indo-Pacific, we are a resident power in the Indian Ocean. So anything that happens on these supply lines of sea lanes of communications impacts us directly on our own security and growth. So India has also alternative plans launched itself, and the Prime Minister Modi has very clearly mentioned that we are a part of it, whether it is through Quad or bilaterally or otherwise. India has been developing its multi-alignment policy with many countries, and China hopefully will not indulge in any of those kind of issues that it is very much known for. It's hegemonistic, it's aggressive, good warrior diplomacy, because it will not cut any ice with India. And so we have partnerships with many other organizations where China is quite prominent, like the BRICS, like the SCO, and there will be summits. India is chairing SCO, and the BRICS summit will be held in China this year now. It's moved from South Africa to China. And we have a trilateral RIC, Russia, India, China. So we are spanning like any major power. You have interests in every geography, in every place. But I personally feel that China is going to be a major challenge for India in every geography. And in the near future, the Americans think that they'll have to contend with China. So it is good to exchange views, ideas, and strategies, which is very important. And Chinese are rattled by this, no doubt. But at the same time, it's better they become more. I must say, they must be able to calibrate their own policies so that things don't pass where it affronts the other countries.
All right. Well, certainly a lot of important takeaways there from this historic visit. On that note, Ambassador Trigunya, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
All right, let's now go across to our next guest. We are now joined by a former Indian ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ma'am, welcome back. Great to have you with us once again. We're looking back at the big takeaways from this historic 3-day visit that has just concluded. And of course, what is very interesting is that, President Biden described India and the US as two great friends, powers, and democracies, and said the India-US ties will define the 21st century. And Prime Minister Modi has redefined AI. He says the future is AI, and that's America and India. Going by everything that we've seen in the last few days, ma'am, what are your thoughts on how this truly historic visit has panned out?
Well, I think it's been a very significant visit because you have some very significant concrete outcomes going beyond the very high protocol which was visible throughout the visit. And here I would focus on especially three agreements. There are a range of agreements because the relationship is so broad-based, but I would focus on three. One is that for the first time, you have an agreement for defense manufacturing in India between a US company and an Indian company. The GE F414 jet engine will now be manufactured in India along with HAL with significant transfer of technology. Now, this is a first because till now there were hesitations in the US about transfer of technology to India and actually getting defense manufacturing off the ground. So this is a significant first. And I do hope that it's not a one-off, but will be the start of a much broader collaboration between the two countries, which will help to establish a defense industrial base in India. Now, this GE F14 engine is going to power the Tejas Mark II aircraft, which is still on the drawing board in India. So it is something which is going to bring the two countries together into the future. It's an important deal. The second is this whole initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which brings together not just business on both sides, but also research institutions and universities to create an ecosystem of collaboration in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, telecommunications, and space. Now, this is a framework, but it's a clear strategic signal as well. It will depend on how far we are able to actually concretize projects and proposals under this framework. The first step is the investment by Micron in India to set up a testing and assembly plant for semiconductors. The first significant shift in terms of high-tech manufacturing in telecommunications was the Apple Foxconn shifting part of their manufacturing to India for mobile phones. That has been quite successful. It has actually now undertaken significant exports from India. But that's only a first step. And I do hope that we are able to, expand on this and that the Micron investment will be the start of greater collaborations between Indian and US companies in these sectors. The third element is space. where we have signed the Artemis Accord with the US, and we are going to collaborate in manned space flight. The US will train our astronauts, and I think they're showing a mission in proposing that perhaps they will be ready to put an Indian astronaut on the International Space Station as early as sometime towards the latter half of next year. So that's a pretty ambitious project. Looking beyond this, I would say that there are huge opportunities in the trade and investment space, and both countries have agreed to try to iron out some of the issues in the trade relationship. And I do hope that there will be greater liberalization and streamlining of the visa process in India, which has been extremely, cumbersome and with long delays.
Absolutely.
So all in all, a very significant visit.
A very significant visit marked by some epoch-making deals, and you're right. H-1B visa rules, we are told, are in fact being changed as part of a pilot project, and that is expected to make life easier for a considerable number of Indians who work in the United States. Let's hope that the wait time for visas in general is reduced. The two sides have also decided to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization. And, talking about the investments that are being made, what I also find interesting is that while you have Micron, that's going to set up this major semiconductor facility in India, the first of its kind in this country, that would involve a huge investment. And Google plans to open its global fintech operations center in Gujarat. That would involve an investment of $10 billion in India's digitization fund. That's been announced by the CEO Sundar Pichai. And equally interesting is the fact, ma'am, that Indian solar panel maker Vikram Solar Limited has announced it's going to invest $1.5 billion in the US solar energy supply chain. So we're not looking at a one-way street here. There are investments being made by companies from both countries, in each other's territories. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's already substantial, presence of Indian companies across all 50 American states.
Yes, I think Indian companies have invested around $40 billion in the United States in recent years, and such as, for instance, the Tata order for a huge number of planes from Boeing. I think this will power a lot of jobs and manufacturing within the US as well.
Yes, absolutely, ma'am. That is exactly the hope. The Prime Minister, in fact, has also talked about how the India-US relationship is, about make in India and make for the world. He said together, the US and India are not just forming policies, we are shaping lives, dreams and destinies. Be it conversions on global issues or tech transfer, both countries are taking strong steps for a better future. Clearly, a lot has been said over the years about how these are natural partners, because we're talking about the oldest democracy in the world and, the largest democracy in the world. But clearly, this relationship has now gone way beyond those cliches, if I may put it that way. We may not be allies, because India insists on maintaining its strategic autonomy, but this is definitely a new partnership that could well define the 21st century. And especially if you look at the whole gamut of issues that have been touched upon during this visit, there isn't a single area of bilateral cooperation that wasn't woven into the discussions that have taken place during this visit.
Yes, if you look at the joint statement, it's indeed exhaustive, covering, science and technology cooperation, covering cooperation in education, cooperation in energy, particularly renewable energy. I mean, it's a whole range of issues that the two countries actually collaborate on, including agriculture and health. So it's not just, defined by any one issue, though the driving factor right now is the convergence of interests in shaping a sustainable balance in the Indo-Pacific and not allowing any one country to have, dominant or hegemonic status in this region. So I think that is the driving force, but the relationship is very, very broad-based.
Absolutely. Let's now talk about these two countries that obviously, have a bearing on India-US ties. Russia and China. Of course, it's another matter that there are some incredibly dramatic developments taking place in Russia today as we speak. But, when you look at some of the key deals that have been signed between India and the United States, the defense deals especially, there is, of course, a school of thought that the US has been very keen to wean India off its heavy dependence on Russia for weapon supplies. And by opening the doors of transfer of technology for India for the very first time, the US has taken a huge step in that direction. Is that something that you would agree with, ma'am? And then, of course, we're going to talk in detail about China. Okay, we seem to have lost the line there to Ambassador Meera Shankar. We will reconnect with her in just a moment. Those are visuals of the Prime Minister's address to a joint session of the US Congress, a historic address that took place on the second day of the Prime Minister's visit. This was the second time, in fact, that he delivered a joint address before the US before a joint session of the US Congress. The last time he had done that was in 2016. He has now become the only Indian leader to have been given this honor, and he is in the august company of world leaders like Winston Churchill and Nelson Mandela, who have done something similar in the past. And as you can see, he was received with rapturous applause by members of the US Congress. All right, I'm told we have Ambassador Meera Shankar back with us. Ma'am, I don't know if you could hear my last question, but if you did, please go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
I think that, Russia also understands that India tries to build its own capabilities from whatever source it finds the most appropriate. And if we are getting access to higher technology or to more advanced levels of technology with, a capacity to absorb that technology and manufacture in India, it's part of our priorities. It's not aimed against Russia. And, we have bought planes from Russia, which we are manufacturing in India. We have bought anti-missile systems, the SAMs from Russia. Not anti-missile systems, surface-to-air missiles, from Russia. So there's a whole range of things which we buy and continue to buy from Russia. But clearly, this is an opportunity to substantially advance the capabilities of the Indian forces, particularly the Air Force, and our own defense industrial manufacturing base. And therefore, it is something which we will decide based on what we feel is the most suitable for us.
Absolutely. And, when you talk about the Predator drone deal, a lot has been said about how these drones are going to significantly enhance India's surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence capabilities, as well as strike capabilities along its land borders with Pakistan and China. Talking about China, the Prime Minister without naming anybody, said in his address to the US Congress that the dark clouds of coercion and confrontation are casting their shadow in the Indo-Pacific. The stability of the region has become one of the central concerns of the India-US partnership. We share a vision of a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific that is free from domination. We've also seen that controversy over President Biden calling Xi Jinping a dictator soon after Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing over the weekend. How significant do you think, ma'am, the China factor is in the India-US relationship today? Yes, this is a relationship that is independent of any external factors. It does stand on its own in many ways, but we cannot dispute the fact that China's growing aggression and expansionism is a matter of concern for India, for the United States, and perhaps for the international community at large.
Certainly, I think China's increasingly aggressive behavior on territorial issues, whether it is in the maritime boundary with regard to the South China and East China Sea, or on the land boundary with India, is a cause of concern to its neighbors. And this is a factor. The challenge posed by China, how to manage it, is clearly a factor in the India-US relationship, though not the only factor by any means. Also, I think both countries seek to avoid conflict with China. And I think that's important because US also says that it will compete with China vigorously, it will cooperate with China where it can, and at the same time it will seek to avoid conflict with China, even though it calls China the one country with both the intention and the capability to pose a challenge to the US in the medium to long term. India too would like to be able to build its capabilities to deter Chinese adventurism on its border, but at the same time it does not seek to provoke a conflict with China and is engaged in dialogue with China on resolving the issue of Chinese encroachments on the border. We've, managed to reach agreement on some of these issues, but several still remain outstanding, and progress has been slow. We've also conveyed to China that if we are unable to restore, the status quo in these areas, or reach agreement to de-escalate the situation in ways with which both countries are comfortable, then it can't be business as usual in the relationship. Because you can't have this lack of trust. You can't have this suspicion and at the same time, grow the relationship as though everything was normal.
Right. Ma'am, I'd like to discuss another issue with you. We've seen over the last couple of days a controversy that was stoked by former US President Barack Obama, who in his interview to CNN said, if I had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, I would argue that if you do not protect the rights of minorities in India, there's a strong possibility that at some point India starts pulling apart. He suggested President Biden must raise this with Prime Minister Modi. Of course, this is an issue that came up even during the press conference that was addressed by the two leaders after their bilateral talks. The Prime Minister was asked what his government plans to do for minority rights in the country. And we saw what he said. He said there is no question of there being any kind of discrimination in India. We are, a democracy. We have a constitution that we abide by. But how do you think the two sides have handled this rather prickly issue? Needless to say, President Obama's comments have sort of stirred anger in some sections here in India. Well, there are those who say that President Biden has chosen to take a much more pragmatic stand on this issue because he said, democracy is in American DNA and it's in the Indian DNA as well. What do you think?
I think the Biden administration has sought to handle these issues somewhat delicately and pragmatically. I think there's a section of liberal opinion in the US, both in the media and in the Congress, which is very concerned about some of these issues and has expressed it publicly. But the Biden administration, and I think for any administration, I think these are complex choices. And the Biden administration has chosen to downplay these issues in public and to prioritize actually building a strong strategic partnership with India. And I think that is their policy, because in public, they have chosen to avoid pointing fingers at India. And even when they discuss these issues, they always talk about them in a way that democracy is facing challenges and there's work to be done, mutually and by all countries to reinforce democracy.
Right. Also, ma'am, before we let you go, you've been a career diplomat, you've been India's ambassador to the United States, you have seen many presidents and prime ministers over the years. A lot has been said about the personal rapport that Prime Minister Modi and President Biden have built over the years. They've actually met multiple times in recent years. The president even reminded Prime Minister Modi of how he had hosted him at a luncheon when he was the vice president, and their relationship goes back many years. We've seen some warm hugs being exchanged as well during this visit and previously. How important do you believe personal chemistry really is between any two leaders when it comes to shaping ties between their two countries? Is personal chemistry an important element of foreign policy?
Let me say it helps at the margins. Relations between countries are driven by the interests of those countries. Personal relationships between leaders can influence at the margin, but I don't think they can change the course of the relationship. Those will be driven by larger factors and national interests.
Fair enough. We'll leave it at that. Ambassador Meera Shankar, thank you so much for joining us, ma'am, and sharing your perspective with us on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic 3-day visit that has now concluded. Before I go across to our next guest, let's quickly play out for our viewers what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in his address to the Indian diaspora. That was his last engagement before he left the United States. Let's listen in.
ये सारे समझौते, ये एग्रीमेंट्स सिर्फ कुछ नीतियों को आगे बढ़ाना मात्र नहीं है, ये भारत अमेरिका के करोड़ों लोगों के भाग्य को नई ऊंचाई देने का काम हुआ है। Together, we are not just forming policies and agreements. We are shaping lives, dreams, and destinies.
It was an honor to meet Prime Minister Modi during a historic visit to the US. The excitement here, in terms of seeing the progress India has made, particularly around the vision of digital India and the economic opportunity. And I had met the Prime Minister in December, and we continued our conversation. And we shared Google is investing $10 billion in the India Digitization Fund, and we are continuing to invest through that, including in companies working on AI. As part of that, we have a 100-language initiative. We are bringing BART to more Indian languages very soon. And we are also excited today that we are announcing the opening of our global fintech operations center in Gift City, Gujarat, and it'll cement India's fintech leadership thanks to UPI and Aadhaar, and we're going to build on that foundation and take it globally. So we are very excited at the progress, and with the advent of AI, I think the opportunity for India to make more progress is definitely exciting, and we're going to support the Prime Minister's vision there. I mean, his vision for digital India, was ahead of its time. I now see it as a blueprint other countries are looking to do, and the follow through on the scaling up of India's digital stack, is a model other countries are thinking about. And I think it's something which will be important in G20 as well, which is obviously happening in India. So it's a real exciting to see the progress, his commitment towards the economic growth for India, and we are glad to be partners in that journey.
All right, joining me now is Suhasini Haidar, National and Diplomatic Editor with The Hindu. Suhasini, welcome back.
Thank you, Neha. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you on the show. The 3-day visit has concluded, so we are looking back at the key takeaways and how this historic visit has panned out. President Biden said India-US ties are going to define the 21st century, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, of course, he's known to have a penchant for acronyms, has redefined AI. He says the future is AI, and that's America and India. Yes, a lot of epoch-making deals and big-ticket announcements have been made during this visit, and we'll get into those details in just a moment. But looking at the big picture first, do you believe that this is a visit which, all the cliches aside, has truly taken the India-US relationship to the next level?
Definitely, Neha. I think it has taken, opened a whole new chapter, if you like, in India-US relations. But we have to look over the last 2 decades to realize that there have been several such visits, Prime Minister Modi's own visit in 2014, that have taken things to the next level. For the last 20 years, what we've seen is India-US relations growing year upon year. Having a different focus, perhaps, through maybe 2005, and the focus was really on the nuclear deal. Since 2010, we've seen much more geopolitics getting involved, really driving the relationship. The technology partnership that began in 2012 now is really seeing some real, fruits of all that labor over a decade. And if we are able to see technology transfer coming out of this visit, then certainly relations have been taken to a new level. I say that because right now what we've got is an MOU. There's still congressional clearances required for the jet engine deal to go through. There's other deals which have been inked but need to be completed. And finally, there are these joint task forces, which are very important, but need to then show progress as well. But the conceptualization of India and the US as partners over technology, and the idea of them being trusted geographies for future technology partnerships, whether it's in critical and emerging technologies, whether it's in semiconductors, whether it is in things like jet engine technology, those now have been sown.
Absolutely. And let's now talk about some of these deals in greater detail. The one deal that has grabbed the most headlines in recent days, and not without reason, is of course the fighter jet engine deal. As you mentioned, an MOU has been signed between General Electric and Hindustan Aeronautics for the joint manufacture of these fighter jet engines here in India. This is a first in many ways. The Indian side has described it as a trailblazing initiative, because this is the first time that the US is sharing such sensitive technology with a non-ally. This is the first time that India is getting any real technology from the United States, something that has been an irritant in the bilateral relationship in the past. And correct me if I'm wrong, currently there are only 4 countries in the world that actually possess this technology, which the US calls the crown jewel of its defense production. And you have in fact written a story in The Hindu today that says we can expect up to 80% technology transfer And in fact, officials on the American side say we do not rule out this going up to even 100%. Now, this is truly path-breaking in so many different ways.
No, absolutely. And remember that the original negotiations that took place from 2012 to 2019 looked at about 58% technology transfer. Clearly, that was not enough for India. But remember, even until you hit that 100%, anything before that, then, you have to actually see what it is that is being withheld from India. Can we produce any of this ourselves right now? We do need the technology transfer to do it. But is the core engine and the core technology that is being transferred going to come to us with conditions? I think that's the second question. So one part is there's no question, it's trailblazing, it's path-breaking. They've used all these words really because over decades, India has been denied of technology, just like over decades, India was denied nuclear fuel and nuclear engagement with other countries. After 2005, India was able to conclude civil nuclear deals with so many countries and continues to do so. So now the question is, technology has been denied to India over the years, and this has always been a sticking point between the two countries. So this deal will be a prototype for what is to follow because of a few reasons. And Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra was asked this question, and he said, yes, we understand that there are certain challenges, regulatory challenges, because technology cooperation for the US in particular comes with a lot of its own riders. One is the Export Administration Regulations, which is called the EAR. These are really to make sure that there are export controls on anything that the US does with another country and makes sure that that country then cannot either appropriate that technology for re-export or sharing with other friends of it. So in a sense, the US will be accepting that it trusts India enough, even though India is not an ally, to keep that technology to itself. And India's track record has been very good in other such spheres. The second technology that second regulation he referred to was the ITAR, which is a newer law, but it's also on the sharing of technology administration. So that is a newer one. And remember, there is the new CHIPS Act in the US as well that looks to seek a lot of production being done in the US and not outside it. So there will need to be exemptions under that. And if all of those go through, so the Congress puts those through, clears them, the license has now been submitted to the Congress for notification. Then the next question is going to be, has the Congress done it without imposing any conditions? Is the Congress expecting India in some way to curb its engagement with other countries, like Russia, for example? Is it contingent on India conforming or coming into any kind of a coalition with the US when it comes to other countries like China? So these are some of the fine print details that will emerge in the next few months. The story we did certainly had Indian defense sources, official sources, really very, very confident that this hurdle will be cleared fairly soon. And once it is cleared, that a jet engine could actually be co-produced in India within 3 years.
Right. Now, let's look at, some of the other deals that have been inked. We're talking about the fighter jet engine deal. We're talking about how India is going to procure 31 cutting-edge Predator drones for its armed forces from General Atomics, another American major. We are talking about American technology firm Micron, you just referred to it, setting up India's first semiconductor plant. That is going to involve a huge investment. In the area of quantum computing and artificial intelligence, the two sides have established a joint Indo-US quantum coordination mechanism to facilitate joint research between the public and private sectors. Now, when we talk about defense ties moving to the next level and technology cooperation taking place between the two countries in a big way, how much of it is, America, in a sense, reposing its faith, like you said, in India? And how much of it is to do with the fact as we've discussed over the last many days, that the US does want to wean India off its dependence on Russia for weapon supplies, and of course the fact that there is a common adversary called China, whose growing belligerence, expansionism and revisionism is becoming a matter of huge concern for India, for the US, and many would argue for the international community at large.
Neha, absolutely. And when you look at the defense purchases, of course, some of it is just mercantile. It's about give and take, buy and sell. India clearly needs the drones. And yes, some of it is because of the situation with China at the line of actual control. India also needs to be part of some constructs, the joint sort of task forces that have been set up for the future when you're looking at quantum computing, AI, advanced computing, and all the rest of that. I think you have to make a sort of separation between the things that are just pure deals, and many of them are just B2B deals between private companies, somebody investing in India, Indian companies investing in the US, or sending Indians to be trained in the US. These are essentially private deals that the government has sought to help push forward, both on the American side and on the Indian side. The rest is about the construct that brings the two countries together. And that's what's important about this deal, that in no way, about this visit, that in no way has the US or India suggested a shift in India's strategic autonomy or in its position thus far. So when you're looking at the things like space cooperation, these are win-win situations. India has joined the Artemis Accords. 26 countries are a part of that. Looking at space cooperation in the exploration of the moon, Mars, and beyond. So this is something that is a broad-based kind of thing. India has joined 11 other countries that have already formed the Mineral Security Partnership. That, of course, is a message to China, because, of course, China has a global monopoly over critical minerals, and others are now looking at how to find the mineral reserves that you need for things like electric vehicles, that you need for EV batteries and all the rest of that. And look not only for where those reserves are, because countries like Australia have huge reserves, but how you can make the most of it, and perhaps set up more of that industry for processing chips in India. So those are the broader areas that I was talking about, where there is a sense of a joint vision together. The deals are important. Let's remember, many of these deals have already been announced or signed, and they were sort of collected and put together into the joint statement. But many of those agreements between India and the US, and this is on the policy sphere, actually mean that the two countries are looking to work together in futuristic technologies, semiconductors, clean energy transitions. Of course, the jet engine technology deal, again, is a quasi-private deal, but it does fall into this category because it could show the way for other technology transfers from the US.
Right. One can argue that even if there is a Russia and China angle to it, India cannot really complain. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, as they say. But on a more serious note, yes, apart from these big ticket deals that have grabbed headlines, that have been talked about so much in recent days, like you mentioned, Suhasini, there are a lot of other important takeaways as well, a lot of other deliverables. You mentioned the Artemis Accords that India has now joined. The two countries have decided to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization. You mentioned India joining the Mineral Security Partnership that aims to create critical energy supply chains, and then there is the visa issue. Let's talk a little bit about that. A lot of interest here in India, understandably. We are told that H-1B visa rules are going to be amended as part of a pilot project for now, and that's likely to make life easier for a lot of Indians who work in the United States. How much of an impact do you believe that is going to have? And let's hope that it doesn't remain, at a superficial level. And then, of course, there's been a lot of frustration over these endless, wait for visas. Some have pointed out that the US says it has straight ties with China, and yet a Chinese national would probably be able to get a visa in just days, while Indians have to wait for 2 to 3 years to get a visa. Is that an issue, Suhasini, that you believe has been adequately addressed in these bilateral talks, and are we likely to see any significant movement, in this particular area going ahead?
Well, Neha, firstly, on the actual wait for a visa, I think already things have been put into place for over the last 6 months. And now it does not take as long to get a US visa. I think it's a matter of a few weeks. It was basically a question of bringing the capacities for visa interviews and all the rest back up to pre-COVID levels and adding some more. And I think that has been done. And that was probably done after meetings last year between External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and Tony Blinken. When it comes to the H-1B visas, yes, the US has agreed to a pilot project. That would mean that Indian professionals on H-1B visas in the US don't actually have to come back to India in order to renew that H-1B visa, which has led to a lot of disruptions in the past in their lives. But really, to be honest, Neha, I don't think a developing and nearly developed country like India of its size requires to put issues like visa into the bilateral basket and put pressure on diplomatic resources when it comes to visas. Because eventually each country has their own visa policies. These are not specific, for example, to Indians. In fact, Indians have the greatest benefits. They get the largest share of H-1B visas. And in some respect, as an Indian, I would say, these are the best of India. These are our brains. We must actually find ways that they should find opportunities in India and not just look for ways in which the US can absorb them better and get the best of our talent pool in the US. So my views on the visa issue are a little different from others. Now, you discussed the WTO resolutions. These are important because remember, in the Trump era, it was all about trade. So, we've seen these phases, as I said, every time it's been driven by a different thing. There's a nuclear deal. There's been, trade issues during the Trump era. The Trump era saw big announcements of energy deals, LNG energy that India would invest in the US, which eventually never saw the light of day. So we've seen different phases, and the trade disputes between India and the US when it came to President Trump's tenure led to a lot of WTO cases against India. High, unequal tariffs, or for stopping market access, or even for something called price caps, when India said, we will put a price cap on medical devices like stents for hearts and all the rest of that. So there are a number of these cases that were put in that era. But the more important one, which frankly is not being discussed as much, but it is there in a line in the joint statement, is India's GSP status, which America revoked unilaterally in June of 2019 and has not yet actually sought to restore it. They keep saying, the US government says, of course, this is a congressional thing, that once America has decided to revoke a special privilege, this was called the generalized system of preferences, that gives Indian exporters certain benefits, then it has to be restored by a sort of vote in Congress, which is obviously has been a little more difficult for the Biden administration because of its numbers. So that is one area, and in the joint statement it says that India still looks forward to that GSP status being restored for India, where they have not yet made any progress. The third area of trade, so one is these resolutions at the WTO, which is very important. 6 out of 7 major cases have now been resolved out of court by mutual consideration and by the acceptance of more market access. We'll get the details of exactly where the market access is being given. The second is the GSP status. And I think the third, which has for the moment again been shelved, is the idea of working on a free trade agreement. India is, of course, in negotiations with so many countries for a new free trade agreement with them, but not yet with the United States. That's because the Biden administration came in and very honestly said, we don't have the bandwidth for these free trade agreements. We probably, because in the US system, they have to always be cleared through Congress. And then you have to use all your favors and IOUs with the Republicans for that. So the Democrat administration has more or less put these FTAs on the back burner. And Foreign Secretary Quatra also seemed to suggest that the FTA was something further down the road. Of course, India's real ambition with the US is that it has now about $190 billion in bilateral trade in goods and services. And the eventual goal is for about $500 billion, which is where the other major economies of the world are.
Right. Clearly, these points that you've raised are important, Suhasini, and a reminder to us that even as we celebrate the big deals and the, forward movement that has undoubtedly happened, there is still a lot of work to be done. This is a work in progress, whether it's restoration of the GSP status or free trade agreement or a lot of other things. And, the US, of course, calls India a very important partner. But remember, it took the US almost 2 years to send a full-time ambassador here to India. Of course, it was on account of domestic politics, but fact of the matter is that this did become a bit of an issue. Now we, of course, have Ambassador Eric Garcetti here. Also, I like the point that you made earlier about Indians jostling for visas. I like what you said. That was a self-respecting Indian talking. What also struck me is every time we say the Prime Minister met with top American CEOs, it turns out so many of them are of Indian descent. So if you ask me, while it hurts a little at some level, of course it also speaks to the humongous accomplishments of the Indian American community, something that the Prime Minister Modi personally takes a lot of pride in and has repeatedly referred to, including in his address to the US Congress.
Correct. And I think even President Biden in his welcoming statement made that point that the India-US relationship is built on the foundations laid by Indian Americans. Of course, there aren't that many Americans that have set up in India. So it is really about the Indian diaspora in the US that he was referring. And remember, there have been decades in which US-India relations have really actually been very cold, the Cold War in particular, but even after that, there's always been a lot of mistrust at the governmental level. There have been decades before a US president visited, when President Clinton came to India. And so we've seen that era, and yet the US-India relationship persisted, has remained strong, simply because there is that connect between the people. Every family or every town in India or every village in India does have someone aspiring to go to the United States, to get an education, to get a job, to settle there, move their families there. So that diaspora has been very intrinsic and very important for the India-US relationship. You referred to the CEOs of Indian origin. There are so many, and there are always these WhatsApp messages floating around about just how the entire Silicon Valley really runs on the backs of Indian American CEOs and founders and scientists of various sorts. So that is known. That is a reason why the Indian American community is respected. The third part, I think, what we have seen in the last maybe decade, the growth of, has been Indian Americans in the political sphere. So within the White House, there's a large number, if you look even at
the Samosa Caucus
partnership. Sorry?
The Samosa Caucus. Vice President Kamala Harris herself introduced them as the Samosa Caucus yesterday. Sorry, please go ahead.
But, I mean, there is that. There are now, I think, 4 or 5 members in that. But within the administration, if you look in the National Security Council that has been working on the technology partnership, there's Tarun Chabra, who works along with Jake Sullivan. In every field, you do see the Indian American diaspora really doing itself proud by being a part of the US structure and the US firmament. I think Prime Minister Modi taps into that with his diaspora events. The only thing that one must remember is that eventually these are not Indian citizens. They are US citizens. And just as in the US, over time, there's been a certain negativity attached to, say, the Chinese American lobby, as it's called, or the Jewish Israeli lobby, as it's called, one must be careful about not crossing those boundaries. I think the Indian American community is something that both sides celebrate, because we all do know people, we all have close relatives, we all care about people who are Indians who have made it big in the United States. But it is a fact that they are now US citizens. So when you see a Nikki Haley and when you see a Kamala Harris, it's of some pride that their origins are from India. But at the end of the day, those are American citizens, and they should be expected to uphold American interests rather than Indian ones.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that they have made abundantly clear through a lot of their statements. Pramila Jayapal is, of course, somebody who's even quoted a lot of controversy here in India because of, her critical views on the functioning of the Modi government. Though, of course, she was present at the luncheon that was hosted by the US State Department, by Antony Blinken and Kamala Harris yesterday. Of course, since we're talking about the Indian diaspora, there were some very interesting moments when of course, Prime Minister Modi received rapturous applause and somebody said 15 multiple ovations. I wasn't counting, but yes, there was a very enthusiastic response to his speech at the US Congress. He turned to Kamala Harris, said, this person behind me, she's made history. We're also proud of her. Kamala Harris herself, during that luncheon for the Prime Minister, mentioned all the US Congress members of Indian descent and said, well, they are known as the Samosa Caucus. And then she went on to talk in great detail about her childhood, her mother, who hails from India, and how India has been a very big part, a very big influence in her life, and a very big part of her journey, leading to all the way up to the office of the Vice President of India. That has been certainly, those have been some of the interesting moments.
No, very much so. And I think even, President Biden seems to completely recognize the power of Indian Americans in his own administration. He turned to Kamala Harris during that first welcoming ceremony on the South Lawn as well. But, you mentioned Pramila Jayapal, and that's where there has to be that understanding. Pramila Jayapal, after all, was one of the original signatories, the person who brought that letter along with Chris Van Hollen of 75 lawmakers who wrote to President Biden saying, India-US ties are fine. Inviting Prime Minister Modi to America as a state guest is great, but you must publicly speak about India's human rights record, something Mr. Biden obviously did not do. He took care not to mention India's human rights record during that entire public engagement. But the fact is that Pramila Jayapal is too of Indian origin, in fact, grew up in India. So, at some level, I think us as Indians have to recognize then that as we bask in the glory of Indian Americans and talk about the power of the diaspora, that even the diaspora then has similarly a greater interest in what happens inside India. So when a Pramila Jayapal or even in the past a Ro Khanna are critical of India, that's something then we have to accept as a result of that extra interest in India that people of Indian origin have.
Right. And, you mentioned the issue of human rights. We were talking earlier in the week about certain elephants in the room. This clearly was one of them. And, even though President Biden, so Hasini, you just pointed this out, and many believe, has taken a very pragmatic stand on this issue, has handled it very delicately. All he said was, I believe there's democracy in American DNA and there is democracy in the Indian DNA, leaving it at that. However, somebody who's not been so delicate in expressing his views on religious freedoms in India is former President Barack Obama. Now, he has courted some controversy in India because, as we know, in that interview that by now has gone viral on the social media, in that interview to Christiana Amanpour of CNN, President Biden says, if I had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, I would argue that if you don't protect the rights of minorities in India, there's a strong possibility that at some point India starts pulling apart. And then he goes on to suggest that President Biden should actually take this up with Prime Minister Modi. How do you look at this controversy? The Congress party says, from my friend Barack, he's now become Hussein Obama. You saw that controversial tweet put out by Himanta Biswa Sarma, the Assam Chief Minister. So President Biden President Obama, I beg your pardon, not mincing his words. But then, some would say as a former president, he has that luxury that the sitting President Biden doesn't. How do you look at, how President Biden handled it, and the fact that these questions came up repeatedly in that press conference that was addressed by the two leaders, the question that was put to Prime Minister Modi and how he answered it?
Interesting. And as you pointed out, we had called it the elephant in the room. I think on the bilateral stage, it remained an elephant in the room. It did not get discussed publicly at all. President Biden did not refer even, except to talk about shared democratic values between India and the US. And then, as I said, there were these 75 lawmakers who wrote this letter. Then there were a handful, I think just a few lawmakers like AOC, as she's known, Octavia Cortez, or Ilhan Omar, or Rashida Tlaib, or I think Jamal Bowen, who actually announced that they would be boycotting Prime Minister Modi's address at the Congress. That's certainly an extreme step. If you don't want to go, you just don't go. But to announce that you're boycotting it, that certainly shows a certain, really an extreme step. But then there was the interview with President Obama, former President Obama. And I think while there are many questions, and we'll probably never know the answer to them, was this something that Mr. Obama could have done without actually consulting with President Biden? Because at the end of the day, that interview came out on exactly the same day as the state visit. Perhaps if it had come out just after or even a few days before, it may not have caused the same commentary as it did, but it seemed to be timed almost to coincide with the state visit. The second point being that President Obama is not just a former Democratic president. He was the president when President Biden was vice president.
Absolutely.
So a period of 8 years where they work together and they remain extremely close. So the question does come up from an Indian perspective. Was this a good cop, bad cop play that, you have President Biden saying what he's saying, which the Indian side had absolutely no qualms about. And then you get the former president, who is no stranger to India. Today, you might find members of the ruling party or fans of the government actually coming out and saying, Mr. Obama has no business to say this. But then Mr. Obama used to be an extremely popular figure in India. He visited India. He came here as the guest on Republic Day. The close ties between him and Prime Minister Modi are very well known. We've seen them, in the Beast together, traveling together, doing
my friend Obama, my friend Barack
together. So yeah. It's a question of you can't just sort of accept all of that, but the moment he says something critical, say he has no business to speak, because you've allowed him to speak on a number of other issues when they have been positive comments. The question of human rights, Neha, at the end of the day is not a bilateral one. Countries cannot negotiate with each other on the state of how they treat their own citizens. The US, of course, takes this larger-than-life role in the world of a policeman of the world, if you like. And Mr. Biden himself has taken this role of spreading democracy in the world. But at the end of the day, no country is going to listen to another country's, and negotiate with them about the state of democracy or human rights in their own country. So I think this is how the administration decided to balance it out. They have many people, particularly in the Democratic Party, who have serious concerns about what's happening inside India. But that's where it ends. They can express their concerns. Beyond that, it is for India. But I will make the point that when Prime Minister Modi, who has not since 2015, because I think the last time he addressed a press gathering like that was perhaps in the UK in 2015, in 2015, and before that with President Obama in Delhi in 2015 as well. He has not taken questions from the press in any of his foreign visits, and there have been so many of them. He has not addressed a press conference in India. He's never taken a question like that on human rights from a reporter in India either. So for him to take that question itself seems to mean that somewhere there, the Indian side recognized the need to do it. So it's not as if the government completely ignored the protests or the people coming out and outside the White House or the lawmakers or what Mr. Obama said. They felt they needed to respond to this commonly expressed concern, and it's been expressed in every major US newspaper. I think if you look at the op-ed pages of the last week alone, in the top 10 news outlets in the US, there has been conversation about India's human rights record, its democracy records, press freedom record, and all the rest. So I think they decided to acknowledge it. which is why Prime Minister Modi decided to answer that question in the US, which he has not done so far. And he said very clearly, there's no discrimination in India. Everybody is equally entitled to the benefits of India. And he said, if there is no humanity, if there are no human rights, then it cannot be called a democracy. I think those were very, very strong words. I would perhaps hope that he will make that same statement when he comes back to India, because the tweets you referred to that came from senior members of the ruling party seems to indicate that it was okay to slam Mr. Obama and to particularly make a reference to his middle name. Of course, his father was a member of the minority. So there seems to be that effort to do that. Now, if Prime Minister Modi was to come down on that when he came to India and make the same statement that without human rights, without humanity, without human values, there is no democracy, I think that would be an extremely positive step.
Right. And, you know, frankly, those insinuations about President Obama's middle name, I think, are just in bad taste. Final question, Suhasini, before we let you go, what do you make of the coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit in the American media? You know, in the past, there's been a lot of criticism that not only is most of the American media left-leaning and they're accused of a certain ideological bias and elitism, but they've also been accused of actually pretty much ignoring past visits by Prime Minister Modi. This time, as you mentioned, there has been a lot of commentary on India's human rights record under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but by and large, we've also seen him make the front pages of most leading newspapers this time round. Do you think there's been a distinct shift? What do you make of their coverage of his visit this time around?
I think, the US administration has recognized this as a special visit. Remember, Prime Minister Modi is only the third Indian leader to be accorded a state visit. First, there was Dr. Radhakrishnan in 1963. Then there was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2009. Of course, many Indian leaders have visited at very high official levels of the visit, but the grade of state visit was only given to this one. Prime Minister Modi is also the third leader to have been given that state visit in the Biden White House. Because of COVID, 2 years went by, and then Mr. Biden began his state visits in December last year by inviting President Macron. After that, by inviting President Yeol from South Korea, and now Prime Minister Modi. So there is that recognition that this is an important visit. Secondly, as you pointed out, the interest in India, which may have been largely about the human rights violations and Mr. Modi's record, has also ignited an interest in the India-US relationship. Many of the newspapers wrote about the difference, the balance between pragmatism and idealism in the Biden administration. They talked about how that President Biden was seeking to balance these two, but also go forward with India, particularly when it came to the China challenge and the need to keep India on side. And that has led to the front pages you referred to, where there was, I think, the Financial Times, which is, of course, the UK paper, but also the New York Times, the Washington Post. They all had front page references to the Prime Minister's visit. And you're quite right. In previous visits, it's been harder to find the same kind of coverage being given.
All right. Always a pleasure talking to you, Suhasini. Thank you so much for your time and perspective.
Thank you, Neha. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you again soon. And let's now invite our next guest. Former diplomat Ambassador Manju Seth is also with us. Welcome back, ma'am. Your thoughts on how this historic 3-day visit has panned out? A lot that's happened, a lot for us to unpack, some historic deals, a lot of interesting and significant statements that have been made. And the Prime Minister, in his last engagement before leaving the United States, made an interesting statement. He seems to have redefined AI. He says the future is AI, and that's America and India.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting, original also, because AI is the future, and to link it with, that is, artificial intelligence is the future, and to link it with America, India, I think is again apt in some ways, and also an important, interesting way of putting the relationship into perspective, because the way things are in the world right now, it is imperative that India and in the geopolitical shifts that are taking place, I think it is important that India and the US are recognizing the importance of being together or working together of this partnership. And we can see that across the board, there has been collaboration. I think in defense, in artificial intelligence, in drones, space, everything, energy security, I think you name it and it's there. So I think that is, again, a very important outcome of this visit. And as, this time, again, I found that in the Congress, for instance, it was an interesting, the address to the Joint Congress that PM Modi gave. I think the reception that he received from both sides and the fact that there was no, there didn't seem to be at least, any negativity or negative kind of signaling by anyone, by and large. And as far as the media goes, again, I think usually India has been ignored in the US media, except to criticize and to focus on the negatives and the negativity that is, or the whatever you want to term it, the negative or the downsides in the Indian system. And I think that shift I could see this time in the US media and how they gave coverage to the visit. Otherwise, usually they do not give much coverage. In the previous visits also we saw there was not much coverage at all. And the fact that India has, or let me put it this way, that both the US and India have realized that there is convergence between their interests, not only for now, but also for the future. And since that is being recognized by both sides, this visit has been given the importance, the due importance, keeping in mind India's sensitivities also. I think that is again an important development that was observed, that India's sensitivities were kept in mind and there was no lecturing, so to speak, to the Indian leadership or to India on various aspects. Yes, those things must have been discussed. They've been talking of human rights and other religious freedoms and democratic downslide, etc. in the media. But I think those have been recognized as not the norm. And because if you recall, their spokesperson had mentioned that please go to India and see for yourself before the visit. So, I think that recognition and that perception that is changing about India, of course, it's only because India has become stronger. India has, over the years, since the economic reforms of 91, been overall on an upward trajectory. And even during the last economic crisis, India did emerge quite, well and strongly, including after the COVID-19 crisis, the world economies were impacted. India still came up. So I think all these factors, and of course, as many commentators have said, India is a market. Yes, it is a market, or definitely, but it is also an important partner. We have to remember that, and that recognition has been given, and the US has recognized that. And that is why this relationship and this visit assume the importance, and they are being given that importance by the entire government, by the administration, and to a large extent, even by the opposition party, the Republicans. And there has been, we have seen that in the joint address, he received his speech or the points that he made received a standing ovation by both sides. There was no, it was not only one part of, one party or some leaders, acknowledging what he was saying and appreciating what the Prime Minister said. So I think that feeling, or that what I felt was some kind of euphoria, enthusiasm, and energy in the American system, in the American people as well. People, when I say their representatives, and of course in the Indian diaspora.
Certainly, there was a lot of enthusiasm, not only, did they turn out in large numbers as they always do at that interaction that the Prime Minister had with the diaspora, at the time when he received a ceremonial welcome on the South Lawns of the White House. We saw a huge turnout of Indian Americans who cheered the Prime Minister on during that historic moment. But talking about some of the key takeaways from this visit, one of the reasons why it's historic, not just because it was a state visit for an Indian Prime Minister, but because because of the sheer significance of some of the deals that have been made. The biggest of them all, of course, being the fighter jet engine deal, because it comes with the transfer of technology, something that's never happened before in this bilateral relationship, something the US has never done before with a non-ally. According to several reports, the degree of technology transfer could go up to 80%, and there are all of 4 countries in the world presently that actually possess this technology. So no wonder then, India is calling it a game changer and a trailblazer, because not only is it really going to be significantly empowering for India's armed forces, it does take the India-US relationship to the next level in so many ways.
Absolutely, and this transfer of technology, as you said, is being done for the first time. I think, from my understanding, even Russia had not given us complete technology transfer. So the fact that the US is going this extra mile, and they've agreed to share this, and there's also been some indication that if there are upgrades, it will also be given, that technology is also likely to be shared with India. So I think that is a positive thing. And plus, there has been talk of getting components, sourcing components, having them manufactured in India. And for that, there has been some tie-up with some local Indian companies as well, startups in the sector, including for the drones. And I think that, again, and the partnership with HAL, I think, is again very important. The MOU that has been signed with HAL is a very important milestone, as you mentioned, in taking our collaboration, our partnership to the next level. And everywhere you look this time, in every field, I think there is mainly positivities to look out for. In technology, in space, in cutting-edge technology, in the field of having a joint mission, the Artemis Accords that India has signed on to, or has agreed to sign on to. So everywhere we are looking at, and the investments that, after the PM's meetings with all these company CEOs, including Elon Musk, I think all of them are willing and ready to invest. So they have announced their investments. I think they will, sorry. I'm sorry. I think they will implement it. There's been talk that, all these MOUs have been signed, all these announcements have been made. Will it happen? I feel confident this time that all of this will happen. It may take, because India is ready to facilitate all this. It's in India's interest. It is in US's interest to make this happen, to diversify their supply chains. So I think all that is happening. Make in India as part of our Atmanirbhar Bharat focus. So all that is happening. And I think, as you mentioned, transfer of technology in this field, and I think it is likely in other fields as well, in other niche areas where there's also talk of working together in innovation, in new technology, in researching. So I think all that new research, so setting up these, and there was co-location talk of the startups in both countries to come up with innovative solutions and to innovate in every way, including in AI, and how to use AI to find solutions. And of course, in green energy and other climate change, to address all these key challenges, India and US definitely play and have an important role to play in ensuring that the world becomes a better place to be.
Absolutely. The two sides, ma'am, have struck some important defense deals, and defense and technology cooperation seem to have really emerged as the primary theme, the leitmotif of this visit, and going forward perhaps of the bilateral relationship itself. We've talked about the fighter jet engine deal and the technology transfer that's going to come with it. Of course, procurement of 31 cutting-edge Predator drones by India's armed forces, and of course in the semiconductor area, you have Micron that's going to come in and set a chip making assembly and testing plant here in India for the very first time. Apart from that, the two sides have also agreed to terminate 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization. So even though the headlines have been grabbed largely by the defense deals, it wouldn't be incorrect to say that trade has also been a very important component of the talks that have taken place between the two sides in the last 3 days.
Absolutely. Trade, and there are some sticky issues at the WTO where we did not, where both sides did not have similar views, and those have been ironed out or are being ironed out. And I think that, again, is a positive step forward, because the WTO needs to be energized, needs to be empowered to play its role in world trade, the purpose for which it was set up. And I think India has been pushing this, this fact that all multinational and multilateral institutions which are there need to be energized, need to be reformed, need to be stronger to play their roles. And of course, we did push the UN reforms again, and the US has been supportive, but I think till the US takes that extra strong line on it, or takes the it forward, it is unlikely to move at the pace that India would like. India and the other countries who are looking to reform the UN system, including the other institutions, World Bank and IMF, and that there was an announcement also by the World Bank and which said, and IMF also, I think there was an announcement that there was talk that there would be making things easier. When they give loans, the terms and conditions would be more, less stringent when they give to the developing world. So that's again a positive outcome of all this. And the US, as we all know, is an important deciding member in all these multilateral institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions as they are called. So I think that is an important thing. The WTO definitely agreement, if it is implemented, will be again a very positive step forward to move the negotiations, on the WTO to have a just and equitable trade regime for the world. Yeah.
Right. And, what did you make of some of the other aspects of this visit? There's been talk about how, a personal touch of warmth was extended to Prime Minister Modi. There was a private dinner hosted for him at the White House by the President and the First Lady before the state dinner. Of course, the President was with the Prime Minister when, he met with top American and Indian CEOs. A lot has been said about their personal chemistry. What did you make of all of that?
I think in all what happens in all these international relations, when there's a personal chemistry, a personal, rapport, it definitely helps to reach decisions and to make, make things happen. And that was very visible. And I think this time, again, as I said, they've been very, the US has decided that this is the right moment, the right time to be doing things and to be, partnering with India. And I think that decision, once it has been taken, I've not seen this this much of positivity and this much of the way they've gone out of the way to make everything perfect, I think, at all levels. So I think that has been an important element because of the chemistry, of course, shared between the two leaders, and the bonhomie also, in a way, between them. And I think it was something to see how the First Lady also, at the Science Foundation, also how she, the whole interaction there, and at the private dinner before that, the exchange of gifts, etc. Everything was very, very positive. And even at the White House reception that was held in the daytime, where so many Indians for the first time were allowed to be there. So, and the recognition that India counts. And
Absolutely.
PM Modi is an important leader. So that, and he's a popular leader. So it's a democratic ethos, and which I think President Biden also reiterated, saying that India and the US share trust and democratic values. And in a side kind of reference,
Right.
he said, unlike the US, China. So I think these are all important, pointers to this whole relationship becoming stronger. And of course, the rapport and the special connect between the two leaders, we can see it, how they were so, positive
Absolutely.
And even the First Lady was so positive, and there were so many small gestures which made it all very nice, and it felt nice to see the way the whole thing was conducted, with all due protocol, of course, but also a special touch.
Yes, a special touch. A lot of bonhomie and camaraderie was clearly on display, and I think you summed it up well, ma'am. The message that really has gone out is that India counts. On that note, thank you so much, Ambassador Manju Seth, for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that was our special coverage of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic 3-day visit to the United States and the key takeaways from that visit. Perhaps it would be safe to say that this is a visit that has redefined the India-US relationship. With that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching.
मैं इमरान अहमद खान नियाजी सबके दिल से हल्फ उठाता हूँ.
When Imran Khan came initially into politics, he thought his personal popularity would be sufficient for him. It didn't happen.
The retired military generals are openly saying that Imran Khan is a better choice.
इमरान खान में